The girl with nothing but a name. Hattie Carnegie's American dream. She arrived in America at age 11 with threadbare clothes, no education, and not a word of English. By the time she was 40, she had dressed first ladies, Hollywood stars, and royalty, building a fashion empire that employed over 1,000 people and making herself one of the wealthiest self-made women in America. This is the true story of Henrietta Kanengeiser, who transformed herself into Hattie Carnegie and changed American fashion forever. The wooden bench in the processing hall at Ellis Island was hard and uncomfortable. 11-year-old Henrietta Kanengeiser shifted her weight, watching as immigration officials called family after family forward. Her mother sat beside her, clutching the hands of Henrietta's younger siblings. Her father stood nervously, documents in hand, his eyes darting around the vast hall filled with hundreds of other hopeful immigrants. It was 1900. The Kanengeisers had left everything behind in Vienna, Austria-Hungary, a city of imperial splendor where they had lived in deepening poverty. The journey across the Atlantic had been grueling. Third-class passage meant weeks in the ship's steerage compartment with hundreds of other immigrants, barely enough food, and constant seasickness. Now they waited to enter America, a country Henrietta knew only from stories, a place where, supposedly, even the poor could become rich through hard work and determination. When their turn came, the immigration official struggled with their surname. Kanengeiser, he attempted, frowning at the papers. Henrietta's father nodded anxiously. Occupation? The official asked. Cabinet maker, her father answered in broken English. The official stamped their papers and waved them forward. Just like that, they were in America. As they left Ellis Island on the ferry to Manhattan, Henrietta stared in wonder at the skyline emerging through the mist. This new world of towering buildings seemed impossibly grand and terrifyingly foreign. "Will we be rich in America, Papa?" she asked. Her father's smile was tinged with worry. "In America, Henrietta, you can become whoever you want to be." She couldn't know then how prophetic those words would be. The Kanengeisers settled in a tenement apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, joining thousands of other immigrant families in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the world. Their apartment was a single room with no running water and a shared toilet in the hallway. Cockroaches scuttled across the floor at night. In summer, the heat was unbearable. In winter, they huddled together for warmth. Whatever dreams of prosperity had sustained them during their journey quickly collided with harsh reality. Henrietta's father found only sporadic work as a cabinet maker, barely earning enough to feed the family. Her mother took in piecework, sewing garments late into the night by candlelight. Then tragedy struck. Less than a year after their arrival, Henrietta's father developed a persistent cough. Within months, he was bedridden with tuberculosis. By the time Henrietta turned 12, she was fatherless in a foreign land. "What will we do now, Mama?" Henrietta asked as they returned from the paupers' cemetery, where they had buried her father. Her mother's face was drawn with grief and worry. "You must leave school," she said finally. "We need money for food, for rent." The next day, instead of heading to the public school where she had just begun to learn English, Henrietta went looking for work. For immigrant girls with no education, options were severely limited. Henrietta found a job in a millinery factory, trimming hats for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. The pay was $3 a week, barely enough to keep the family afloat. The conditions were brutal: poor ventilation, dangerous equipment, no breaks. Many of the chemicals used in hat making were toxic, causing tremors and mental confusion that gave rise to the phrase, "mad as a hatter." But something unexpected happened in that sweatshop. As Henrietta trimmed feathers and arranged flowers on ladies' hats, she developed an eye for style. She studied the designs that came through the factory and began to imagine how she might improve them. At night, she would sketch her own designs by candlelight, using scraps of paper and a stub of pencil. "What are you doing?" her mother asked one night, finding Henrietta awake past midnight. "Designing hats," Henrietta replied, showing her the crude sketches. One day I will make hats like these, beautiful hats that ladies will pay good money for." Her mother shook her head. "We are poor people, Henrietta. We must be practical." But Henrietta had already begun to dream a different future. By 16, Henrietta had left the factory job for a position as a messenger girl at Macy's department store. The pay was slightly better, and more importantly, it gave her a chance to observe the world of retail fashion up close. She spent her lunch breaks wandering the store's millinery department, studying the expensive hats and memorizing their construction. "Why are you always looking at hats you cannot afford?" asked another messenger girl one day. "I'm learning," Henrietta replied. "Someday my hats will be sold in places like this." The girl laughed. "You're just a greenhorn with a funny name." That night, Henrietta made a decision. If America was truly a place where you could reinvent yourself, she would start with her name. The richest man in America at that time was the industrialist Andrew Carnegie. With adolescent audacity, Henrietta decided to borrow his surname. "From now on," she told her family, "my name is Hattie Carnegie." Her mother was horrified. "You cannot take a rich man's name. What will people think?" "They will think I am going to be somebody," Hattie replied. It was more than a name change. It was the first step in creating the person she intended to become. At 19, Hattie had saved $100 from years of scrimping, a substantial sum for a young immigrant woman in 1908. Instead of using it as a dowry or contributing it to her family's meager finances, she made a bold decision. She would start her own business. With her savings, she rented a small basement space on East 10th Street and set up shop as a milliner. Her first creations were made from materials she could afford, remnants purchased cheaply from factory surplus, and trimmings salvaged from discarded hats. "What do you know about running a business?" her mother worried. "If this fails, the money will be gone." "It won't fail," Hattie insisted, with the unwavering confidence that would become her trademark. Her first customers were working women like herself, looking for a touch of style they could afford. Hattie's hats were simple but distinctively elegant. Word began to spread. Within 6 months, she had enough regular customers to hire an assistant, a young seamstress named Rose Roth, who would become her business partner. Rose could sew beautifully, and together they expanded from hats into dresses. Their tiny shop became known as Carnegie Ladies' Hatter. When a society matron wandered in by accident and purchased 3 hats, paying more than Hattie had dared to ask, the business took its first major leap forward. By 1913, Hattie and Rose had saved enough to move to a more prestigious address on West 86th Street. Hattie, now in her mid-20s, had developed a distinctive style that attracted wealthy clients who might otherwise have shopped at established department stores or imported their clothes from Paris. "Why is your accent still so strong?" one society client asked her once. "Haven't you been in America since childhood?" "My accent," Hattie replied shrewdly, "reminds my customers that I have European taste." What she lacked in formal education, Hattie made up for with instinct and observation. She traveled to Paris whenever she could afford it, studying the work of French couturiers and adapting their ideas for American women. Unlike many designers who created elaborate, impractical gowns, Hattie specialized in wearable elegance, clothes that flattered a woman's figure while allowing her to move freely. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 unexpectedly accelerated Hattie's rise. With French fashion houses disrupted by the conflict, American women looked to domestic designers. Hattie's business expanded rapidly, moving to an even more prestigious location at East 49th Street and 5th Avenue. By 1918, Hattie Carnegie, Inc. employed over 50 workers and had annual sales exceeding $100,000, a remarkable sum for a business started with just $100 a decade earlier. But the true test of Hattie's resilience came with the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed. Many luxury businesses collapsed as wealthy clients lost fortunes overnight. Hattie, who had never forgotten the poverty of her youth, made a strategic pivot. "We must make beautiful clothes that more women can afford," she told her staff. She introduced ready-to-wear lines at lower price points without compromising her standards of design and quality. While competitors faltered, Hattie Carnegie, Inc. continued to grow. By the 1940s, Hattie's name had become synonymous with American high fashion. Her designs were worn by Hollywood stars like Joan Crawford and Norma Shearer. She dressed New York society women, political figures including Eleanor Roosevelt, and even created wardrobes for European royalty. The immigrant girl who had arrived with nothing now employed over 1,000 people, operated a manufacturing facility and multiple retail locations, and controlled a fashion empire worth millions. "Did you ever imagine this would be possible?" a reporter asked her in 1948 during an interview in her opulent office overlooking Fifth Avenue. Hattie, now approaching 60, smiled. In America, imagination is the only limit. The reality, of course, had been far more complicated than that confident statement suggested. Along the way, Hattie had weathered business setbacks, 3 marriages, 2 ending in divorce, and ongoing struggles with her identity as an immigrant in a society that often looked down on foreigners. She had worked punishing hours, sometimes sleeping on a cot in her workroom rather than going home. She had made hard decisions, including distancing herself from her family of origin as she climbed the social ladder. "What is the secret to your success?" another interviewer asked her. Hattie considered the question. "I was hungry," she said finally. "Not just for food, though there were days in my childhood when we had little enough of that. I was hungry for beauty, for respect, for security. When you start with nothing, you are not afraid to risk everything." In 1956, after more than 5 decades in America, Hattie Carnegie died at the age of 67. Her obituary in the New York Times described her as one of the most important influences on American fashion. Her business, valued at approximately $8 million, equivalent to over $80 million today, had grown from a basement hat shop to a fashion empire that included couture, ready-to-wear, perfume, cosmetics, and accessories. Yet perhaps her greatest legacy was the path she blazed for other immigrants and for women in business. In an era when female entrepreneurs were rare and immigrant success stories were often limited to men, Hattie Carnegie proved that a young girl could arrive with nothing but determination and transform herself into an American icon. Today, vintage Hattie Carnegie designs are collected by museums and fashion connoisseurs. The label she created, with a name she boldly borrowed as an act of self-invention, remains a symbol of the American dream, the possibility that in this country a person can truly become whoever they want to be. On a winter morning in 1900, a frightened 11-year-old immigrant girl named Henrietta Kanengeiser stood on the deck of a ship entering New York Harbor, watching the Statue of Liberty emerge from the mist. She could not have imagined that the country receiving her would one day know her as Hattie Carnegie, fashion pioneer, business tycoon, and quintessential American success story. As she often told her employees in later years, "Remember, I started with nothing but a name, and it wasn't even mine." In the tapestry of American dreams, it is often those who arrive with empty pockets but full hearts who weave the most vibrant threads. Immigrants cross oceans and borders, carrying nothing but hope, facing language barriers, cultural shock, and sometimes outright hostility. Yet they persist. They work jobs others won't take, study late into the night, and send money home while building new foundations. Their stories aren't just tales of survival, but testaments to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. For in choosing to leave everything familiar behind, they've already demonstrated a courage most will never know. Remember, today's struggle is tomorrow's strength, and in the face of impossible odds, the immigrant's heart beats with the most powerful force on earth, unwavering hope. Thank you for watching our channel, Immigrant Courage, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.